The Galactic Alliance Military Academy floated in the void between Orion's belt and what humans once called the Horsehead Nebula. From a distance, it resembled a massive crystalline snowflake, each branch housing training facilities designed to accommodate the extraordinary diversity of species who sought to protect the peace of the known universe. Cadet Josephine Jo Walker stood at the viewport of the arrival's dock, gazing at what would be her home for the next 3 standard years. A simple duffel bag hung from her shoulder containing all her worldly possessions, mostly socks. Humans, as it turned out, were the only species in the Galactic Alliance with a bizarre obsession with foot coverings. Name and planet of origin? Chirped the admission AI, its holographic form flickering between what Joe assumed were supposed to be comforting shapes from various cultures. Currently, it resembled something between an Earth jellyfish and a Proximan therapy blob. Josephine Walker. Earth. Sol System. Milky Way, Joe replied, adding the last 2 items out of habit, though they were hardly necessary. Everyone in this quadrant knew where Earth was. It was the weird little blue marble that somehow produced beings who survived on poison, caffeine, breathed corrosive gas, oxygen, and voluntarily jumped out of perfectly functional aircraft for entertainment. Purpose for enrollment? The AI continued, its tone suggesting this was a particularly amusing question to ask a human. Joe considered her options. Truth? Ambition? The fact that her apartment lease had ended and galactic housing prices were ridiculous? Instead, she went with the answer she'd rehearsed on the 3-month journey here. To graduate without blowing anything up. Too big. The AI paused, its projected form flickering as if processing whether this was a joke. Finding no humor protocols that matched, it simply added the response to Joe's file with an audible bloop. Welcome, Cadet Walker. Please proceed to Dormitory Section 7G. Accommodations have been adjusted for your species' oxygen-nitrogen requirements and bizarre sleep cycle needs. Joe shouldered her bag and stepped onto the moving walkway. Around her, a dizzying array of beings glided, floated, or undulated toward their destinations. A group of Arcturian crystal entities chimed melodically to each other, their translucent bodies refracting light into mesmerizing patterns. A 4-armed Bellatrician security officer directed a group of new cadets with practiced efficiency, each limb gesturing in different directions simultaneously. And then there was Joe, 5'9", plain brown hair tied back in a regulation ponytail, no exoskeleton, no tentacles, no psychic appendages, and absolutely no special abilities. Just another human trying to make her way in a universe that considered her species somewhat of a biological curiosity. Aren't you a little squishy to be here? The question came from an iridescent cloud floating beside her on the walkway. Joe recognized the pattern of electric discharges as the speech method of a Jovian gas being. Probably, Joe admitted with a shrug. But I've got good hand-eye coordination and can open most jar lids on the first try. The Jovian pulsed in what might have been laughter or indigestion. It was difficult to tell with gas beings, and drifted ahead, leaving a faint smell of ozone behind. Joe's dormitory turned out to be a small, but efficiently designed cube. The gravity generators had been calibrated to Earth standard, a thoughtful touch, and the environmental systems maintained a comfortable 22 degrees Celsius with 40% humidity. A bed, desk, and storage unit were the only furnishings. The most prominent feature was a large emergency decontamination shower in the corner, labeled for human biological incidents. Charming, Joe muttered, tossing her bag onto the bed. Her orientation schedule materialized on the wall. First training session would begin at 0600 Academy Standard Time, which her neural translator helpfully converted to 5:27 a.m. Earth Time. Perfect. A soft chime indicated a message. All new cadets report to Mess Hall 3 for nutritional integration, announced a pleasant voice from nowhere in particular. Joe sighed and headed back out. Her personal mission: find something that wouldn't try to digest her from the inside out. Contrary to popular galactic belief, humans couldn't actually eat everything. The mess hall buzzed with the sounds of multiple species attempting to communicate across vastly different sensory systems. Joe grabbed a tray and approached the food dispensers with caution. Each was clearly labeled with species compatibility markers. She located the one marked with the human symbol, a surprisingly accurate silhouette of a human holding what appeared to be a pizza, and placed her tray under the dispenser. A glob of brownish paste fell onto her tray with a sad plop. Nutritionally complete human sustenance, announced the machine. Proudly. Enhanced with all 17 essential amino acids and fortified with minerals suited for your calcium-based skeletal structure. Joe poked it with her spork. What flavor is it supposed to be? Flavor is inefficient, replied the dispenser. After a pause, it added, almost apologetically, but we have included molecules that should approximate your chocolate. Joe found an empty seat at a table occupied by a Danubian starfish-like being and something that looked like a sentient patch of moss. She nodded politely to both and began to eat her chocolate nutrient paste, which tasted exactly like what she imagined astronaut food from the 20th century must have been like, vaguely food-adjacent, but primarily designed to keep you alive rather than happy. You are human, yes? The moss patch vibrated slightly as it spoke, tiny spores puffing out with each word. Last time I checked, Joe confirmed. Fascinating. I have read that humans can regenerate their liver tissue and survive, having approximately 40% of their blood volume removed. Is this correct? The moss leaned closer, its tiny rootlets gripping the edge of the table with disturbing intensity. The liver thing is true. The blood thing is not something we typically volunteer for. The moss seemed disappointed. The starfish, which had been silent until now, suddenly spoke, its words emerging from a small mouth in its central disc. I heard humans can ingest capsaicin for pleasure, it said, all 5 eyes blinking in unison. Is this a religious practice or a form of self-harm? Joe couldn't help but laugh. Neither. We just like spicy food. Both aliens exchanged what Joe interpreted as concerned glances. She'd encountered this reaction before. To most galactic species, humans were walking biological contradictions. They consumed poisons for enjoyment, deliberately exposed themselves to radiation, sunbathing, and had somehow survived as a species despite having no natural armor, weak senses, and a concerning tendency to investigate dangerous situations out of what most species considered a defective curiosity instinct. Well, Joe said, finishing the last of her nutritional paste with a grimace, it's been lovely chatting, but I should prepare for tomorrow's training. As she stood to leave, the moss patch extended a tendril. I am Phloem of the 3rd spore colony of Dendrobia. If you survive initial training, perhaps we could study together. Sounds good, Joe replied, genuinely touched by what constituted a warm welcome in academy terms. I'm Joe Walker. The starfish also introduced itself as something unpronounceable that Joe's translator rendered as bright point and endless night, but suggested Joe could call it bright for simplicity. With potential study buddies acquired and terrible food consumed, Joe headed back to her quarters, mentally preparing for whatever the next day would bring. What it brought, as it turned out, was pain, spectacular, physics-defying pain. The first training session took place in Simulation Dome Alpha, a massive hemispheric chamber designed to replicate various planetary conditions. Today's scenario: high-gravity emergency response drills. Cadets will experience gradually increasing gravitational forces, explained Commander Xyloploth, an imposing figure composed primarily of articulated carapace segments and glowing blue eyes. The exercise tests your ability to function under extreme conditions. Each species has different tolerances, which the simulation will account for. Joe stood in formation with 20 other first-year cadets of various species. She was the only human, which wasn't surprising. Humans made up less than 0.01% of the Academy student body. Earth had only joined the Galactic Alliance 70 years ago, practically yesterday, in cosmic political terms. Begin simulation, ordered Commander Xyloploth, moving to an observation platform that rose above the training floor. The gravity began to increase gradually. Joe felt the familiar heaviness in her limbs as the force reached 1.5 g, then 2 g. Around her, various cadets were experiencing different levels based on their physiology. The crystalline entities barely seemed to notice, while a silicon-based cadet whose homeworld had 0.3 G was already struggling. At 3 G, Jo began to feel the strain. Her movements became sluggish, each step requiring conscious effort. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she forced herself through the obstacle course laid out before them. Crawling under barriers, dragging simulated casualties, and accessing emergency equipment. Good adaptation technique, Cadet Walker, called Commander Xyloploth. Most bipedal species attempt to maintain their upright posture too long. Your instinctive switch to quadrupedal movement is efficient. Jo would have thanked the commander if she had the breath to spare. At 4G, speaking seemed like a luxury she couldn't afford. Her heart pounded against her ribs, and each inhale felt like sucking air through a straw. That's when the simulation malfunctioned. Later, the Academy's report would describe it as a cascading failure in the gravitational calibration subroutines. To Jo, it felt like someone had dropped a planet on her. The gravity jumped from 4G to an estimated 6G in less than a second. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Jo was slammed to the floor with enough force to crack 3 ribs and compress her spine. Around her, chaos erupted as cadets experienced gravitational forces beyond their physiological limits. The Arcturian crystal cadet shattered into thousands of glittering fragments, the silicon-based being liquefied with a horrifying gurgle. Bright, the starfish flattened like a pancake, while Floam the moss was compressed into something resembling a green poker chip. Emergency protocols engaged immediately. Medical drones swarmed into the chamber, and the gravity returned to normal with a suddenness that was almost as jarring as its increase. Commander Xyloploth was barking orders, his carapace bristling with anger or concern or both. Jo lay face down on the training room floor, listening to her heart thud erratically in her chest. Pain radiated from her ribs, and she was fairly certain she'd bitten through her lip. With tremendous effort, she rolled onto her back, sending fresh waves of agony through her torso. Cadet Walker, a medical drone, hovered over her, scanners whirring. Remain still. You have sustained significant internal injuries. A medical transport is en route. Nah, Jo gasped, tasting blood. I'm good. And then, to the absolute horror of everyone present, she stood up. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't pretty. It involved a lot of wincing, at least one muffled curse, and several seconds of wobbling. But Cadet Josephine Walker, with 3 broken ribs, a compressed spine, a mild concussion, and internal bruising across 60% of her body, got to her feet and remained there. Cadet. Commander Xyloploth's voice contained more emotion than Jo had previously thought possible for an arthropodal being. Stand down immediately. Medical assessment is mandatory. Jo nodded, winced at the movement, and managed a weak salute. Yes, Commander. Just give me a minute. The simulation chamber had fallen utterly silent. Every conscious cadet, instructor, and medical drone was staring at the human who, by all medical logic, should have been incapacitated if not dead. That, Jo inhaled sharply, one hand pressed against her rib cage, really hurt. Then, with a wobbly smile that displayed blood-stained teeth, she added, "But I've had worse hangovers." The Academy's AI, which had been frantically analyzing the biometric data streaming from Jo's neural implant, actually glitched for 3.7 seconds, an eternity in computational terms. When it resumed function, it immediately dispatched 12 more medical drones, a specialist in human physiology, and, oddly, a psychologist specialized in traumatic stress reactions. Jo was eventually escorted, walking, despite multiple protests, to the medical bay. The attending physician, Dr. Larillian, a centaurian with 6 arms and a permanently concerned expression, hovered around her with increasing agitation. You have 3 fractures in your costal cartilage, severe spinal compression, a grade 2 concussion, and internal bruising that, frankly, should have you unconscious, Dr. Larillian explained, all 6 hands gesturing at different holographic displays of Joe's internal structure. Yet your vitals are stable. Elevated but stable. How is this possible? Joe, now sitting on an examination platform while various scanners hummed around her, shrugged and immediately regretted it. Humans are pretty sturdy, I guess. Sturdy does not begin to adequately describe this, retorted the doctor. Your species has no exoskeleton, no redundant organs, no significant cellular regeneration capabilities beyond basic wound healing. By all physiological logic, you should be in critical condition. Yeah, but have you considered, Joe countered, wincing as a medical drone applied some kind of cooling gel to her bruises, that would be really inconvenient. Dr. Larillian's multiple eyes blinked in asynchronous confusion. Inconvenient, the doctor repeated flatly. For sure. I've got astronavigation class tomorrow morning. What followed was a heated debate in which Dr. Larillian attempted to mandate a minimum 72-hour observation period, while Joe negotiated it down to a few hours of rest and maybe some of those good painkillers. In the end, a compromise was reached. Joe would remain in the medical bay overnight, receive appropriate treatment, and be released for light duty the following day if her condition improved. What no one had anticipated was that by morning, Joe's condition would improve so dramatically that the medical staff would run the diagnostic scanners 3 times, convinced they were malfunctioning. Your bone density has increased by 2.7%, announced Dr. Larillian, bewilderment evident in every syllable. The fractures have already begun significant calcification, and your bruising has reduced by nearly 40%. Is this normal for humans? Joe, who was already putting her uniform back on despite not being officially discharged, considered the question. Pretty normal, yeah. We bounce back quick. Can I go to class now? This isn't bouncing back, insisted the doctor. This is physiologically impossible without significant genetic modification or nanomedicinal intervention. Nope, just regular old human healing. The technical term is walking it off. Dr. Larillian made a sound that Joe's translator couldn't interpret, but which she assumed was the Centaurian equivalent of an exasperated sigh. I'm adding a note to your file, the doctor declared, all 6 arms typing on different interfaces simultaneously. Human physiological responses defy standard medical parameters. Approach with caution. Cool, Joe replied, already heading for the door. Thanks for the Band-Aids. News of the human cadet who survived 6G and walked away from it spread through the academy faster than a quantum transmission. By lunchtime, Joe had become something of a minor celebrity, with cadets from all years finding excuses to observe her in the mess hall, as if expecting her to perform additional feats of biological impossibility over nutrient paste. I heard, whispered a telepathic Betazoid cadet loudly enough for everyone to hear, that humans can survive having limbs completely severed if they receive medical attention within a certain time frame. That's true, Joe confirmed, causing a wave of murmurs to ripple through the onlookers. But we prefer to keep all our parts attached when possible. Phloem, who had been reconstituted with minimal difficulty, being essentially a colony of plant cells, had its advantages, extended a curious tendril toward Joe's ribcage. Does it still cause pain signals? The moss asked. Yep, Joe admitted, gently deflecting the tendril. But it's manageable. How about you? Being completely flattened seemed rough. Oh, it was merely inconvenient. I lost approximately 12% of my collective consciousness when my spores were compressed, but the colony consensus continues. Your species does not have distributed consciousness, correct? Your brain is isolated in a single vulnerable calcium shell. Joe nodded, taking another bite of today's nutrient paste, allegedly beef-flavored. 1 brain per customer. That's the human way. Bright, who had also recovered with remarkable speed thanks to starfish-like regenerative abilities, joined them at the table. Its formerly flattened limbs were almost back to normal, though they still looked slightly pressed. The commander wishes to speak with you, Bright informed Joe, all 5 eyes blinking in sequence. There is much discussion among the faculty about yesterday's incident. Great, Joe sighed. Nothing like being a scientific curiosity before you've even finished your first week. Commander Xyloploth's office was austere, its only decorations being various medals and a three-dimensional star chart rotating slowly in one corner. The commander's exoskeleton gleamed under the office's bright lights, and the blue glow of his multifaceted eyes intensified as Joe entered. "Cadet Walker," he began without preamble, "you present an interesting challenge to our training protocols." Joe stood at attention, ignoring the twinge in her still-healing ribs. "Sir, our simulations are calibrated based on known physiological limitations of participating species. Your performance yesterday suggests that our data on human resilience is significantly flawed." "I wouldn't say flawed, sir," Joe replied carefully. "Maybe just incomplete. We're pretty good at not dying when we should." The commander's antennae twitched in what Joe had learned to recognize as amusement. "Indeed, the Academy's governing AI has been analyzing your medical data extensively. It has proposed a revision to training parameters for human cadets." Joe waited, unsure if this was good news or bad news. "Additionally," continued the commander, "there has been considerable debate among the faculty regarding your continued participation in standard training exercises." "Ah, bad news then. Some suggest that a specialized program might be more appropriate, given your species' unique physiological responses." Joe felt something sink in her chest. A specialized program sounded suspiciously like being sidelined, treated as too fragile or too anomalous to train alongside everyone else. This was exactly what she'd feared when applying to the Academy. The humans would be seen as too different, too primitive, too squishy to truly integrate. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" Joe requested. "Granted. I didn't come here to be treated differently. I came here to be a Galactic Alliance officer, just like every other cadet. If you put me in a specialized program, you're saying humans don't belong here. And with respect, sir, we've spent most of our history being told we don't belong in spaces we fought to enter." Commander Xyloploth remained silent for a long moment, his exoskeleton completely still. Finally, his antennae quivered slightly. "Your species continues to confound expectation, Cadet Walker. Logic would suggest that after yesterday's experience, you would welcome reduced physical strain." Joe couldn't help but smile. "Humans aren't always big on logic, sir. We're more of a stubborn determination type of species. So, I am beginning to understand." The commander's mandibles clicked in what might have been appreciation. "Very well. You will continue with standard training, with certain reasonable modifications to account for your biology. The Academy does not wish to lose its first promising human cadet to misguided pride." "Thank you, sir." Joe saluted, feeling a rush of relief. "Dismissed, cadet. And do try to avoid further medical incidents this week. Dr. Larillian has submitted an official complaint about human cellular regeneration rates being unnecessarily provocative." Joe managed to keep a straight face until she was well down the corridor, where she allowed herself a small, victorious fist pump, followed immediately by a wince as her ribs protested the movement. Still healing then, but she'd proven her point. Humans belonged here, even if they were the squishiest beings in the quadrant. The next few weeks brought a series of increasingly challenging training exercises. True to his word, Commander Xyloploth made no special allowances for Joe beyond the standard calibrations made for any species. The modified training parameters meant she no longer faced lethal gravitational forces, but that didn't mean things got easier. Chemical hazard response training involved wading through pools of what the safety briefing described as mildly caustic solution, but which felt suspiciously like acid to Joe's human skin. She emerged with first-degree chemical burns across her legs and lower torso, earning her another visit to the increasingly exasperated Dr. Larillian. Again, the doctor demanded, scanning the angry red patches on Joe's calves. "The simulation was calibrated for your species' epidermal sensitivity." "Might have calibrated a bit low," Joe suggested, trying not to flinch as cooling gel was applied to the burns. "But I completed the objective." "Your objective should include self-preservation, cadet. Dr. Larillian reprimanded, but there was a hint of reluctant admiration in the doctor's voice. These will heal within a few days with proper treatment. Try to avoid any additional acid baths in the meantime. Joe saluted cheerfully. No promises, document. Next came the electromagnetic storm navigation exercise, which left Joe with temporary blindness, a minor photoreceptor overload, according to the medical drones, and an interesting pattern of electrical burns across her back where her uniform had melted slightly. Again, she simply reported to medical, received treatment, and returned to training the next day with an irritating tendency to give small static shocks to anyone she touched. The incident that cemented Joe's reputation throughout the academy, however, came during week 6 when experimental weapons testing went spectacularly wrong. The Advanced Weaponry Lab was a massive circular chamber lined with energy-absorbing materials. Cadets stood at individual stations around the perimeter, each testing a prototype weapon under the supervision of Professor Quantum, a being composed entirely of organized light patterns who had been teaching weapons theory for over 300 years. Today's prototypes utilize experimental energy matrices, explained the professor, his form shifting through various spectral colors as he spoke. Each has been calibrated for safety, but maintains standard protocols at all times. Joe's assigned weapon resembled a sleek silver handgun with glowing blue circuitry visible beneath its translucent casing. The information display identified it as a quantum displacement disruptor training model. Begin testing sequence, instructed Professor Quantum. 3 controlled bursts at your designated targets only. Joe aimed at the holographic target floating 10 meters away and pressed the activation stud. The weapon hummed pleasantly, then emitted a focused beam of scintillating energy that struck the target dead center, causing it to pixelate and reform. Nice, Joe murmured, adjusting her grip for a second shot. That's when the Proctarian cadet 2 stations down made a critical error. Instead of firing at his target, he accidentally engaged the weapon's overcharge function while the barrel was pointed at the floor. The resulting energy discharge created a cascading reaction throughout the lab's power systems. Joe saw the wave of azure energy racing along the floor a split second before it reached her. Time seemed to slow as her brain processed what was about to happen. Uncontained quantum energy was about to make contact with her very non-quantum human body. The blast hit her like a freight train, lifting her off her feet and slamming her into the wall behind her station. Every nerve of her body fired simultaneously as the energy coursed through her. For one terrible moment, Joe felt as if she was being simultaneously compressed into a singularity and expanded across multiple dimensions. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. Emergency systems engaged, neutralizing the energy surge. Alarms blared, and containment fields shimmered into existence around each station. Joe lay crumpled at the base of the wall, vision swimming with psychedelic afterimages. She could taste copper and something else, something that shouldn't have a taste, like the concept of Wednesday or the color of distant stars. Her left arm felt both numb and hypersensitive, and there was a curious absence of sensation where her spleen should be. Professor Quantum materialized beside her, his light patterns cycling rapidly through emergency configurations. Cadet Walker, remain still. Medical assistance is incoming. Did I? Joe coughed and was mildly concerned to see tiny motes of blue light escaping her mouth instead of the blood she expected. Did I break the gun? The prototype is irrelevant, replied the professor, his voice modulating with what sounded like actual concern. You have been exposed to approximately 17 terajoules of unshielded quantum displacement energy. By all theoretical models, your molecular structure should be severely compromised. Joe attempted to wiggle her fingers and was relieved when they responded, albeit with a strange trailing effect, as if each finger was moving through multiple planes of existence simultaneously. I feel. She began trying to catalog the bizarre sensations rippling through her body. Really weird. But not dead. Definitely not dead. The medical team arrived with remarkable speed, led by Dr. Larillian, who took one look at Joe and emitted a series of clicks that the translator refused to interpret. This human, the doctor declared to no one in particular, is becoming the bane of medical science. Scans revealed that the quantum energy had indeed affected Joe at a molecular level, but instead of tearing her apart as physics would suggest, her body had somehow partially absorbed and then redirected the energy. She was, in the bewildered words of one medical specialist, slightly quantum entangled with herself. "Is that bad?" Joe asked from her bed in the medical isolation chamber, where she was being monitored by no fewer than 6 different types of scanning equipment. "It is unprecedented," replied Dr. Larillian. "The effect appears to be temporary, but for the next 24 to 48 hours, you exist in a state of quantum uncertainty." "Cool," Joe said, watching with fascination as her hand occasionally blurred when she moved it too quickly. "Does this mean I can walk through walls?" "No," said the doctor firmly. "It means you are confined to this medical bay until the effect dissipates. And no more experimental weapons testing for you this semester." Joe nodded agreeably, then added, "But hypothetically, if I tried to walk through a wall, you would impact the solid surface exactly as normal, with the added complication of potential molecular disruption," the doctor stated with the tone of someone who had anticipated this line of questioning. "In simple terms, the wall would win, and you would become even more of a medical anomaly than you already are." "Fair enough," Joe conceded, settling back against her pillows. She still felt strangely disconnected from herself, as if parts of her were lagging slightly behind others, an effect the medical team assured her would fade as the quantum entanglement resolved itself. By the following morning, the quantum effects had indeed begun to subside. Joe's vital signs stabilized. Her molecules stopped their disturbing tendency to occasionally exist in multiple states simultaneously, and Dr. Larillian cautiously declared her fit to return to her quarters for convalescence. "I don't get it," said one of the medical technicians, a squid-like being named Tentaculin, as they reviewed Joe's final scans. "By every known principle of quantum physics, the energy discharge should have at minimum caused catastrophic cellular disruption. It's the human thing," Joe explained helpfully, already pulling on her uniform despite technically being on medical leave. "We're good at not dying." "It's more than that," insisted Dr. Larillian, who seemed to have developed both a professional fascination with and personal exasperation toward Joe's biology. "Your species shows a remarkable capacity for adapting to trauma. While other species evolve specialized defenses, exoskeletons, regenerative abilities, distributed consciousness, humans appear to have developed a generalized resilience that defies specialized threats. Plus we're stubborn," Joe added, tying her boots. "Don't discount stubborn." Dr. Larillian made a note in Joe's ever-expanding medical file. "I am beginning to believe that stubborn may indeed be a quantifiable biological trait in humans." "Yokrinet." "Now you're getting it. Document." Rather than return to her quarters as instructed, Joe decided that convalescence could just as easily happen in the Academy's recreation facility. If she was supposed to rest, why not do it while watching other cadets in their training sessions? It was practically studying. The recreation facility was a vast space that could be reconfigured to accommodate various species' exercise needs. Currently, a group of avian cadets were engaged in aerial maneuver practice in one section, while several amphibious beings performed what looked like synchronized swimming in a large aquatic tank. Joe found a comfortable observation bench and sat down, feeling only a slight twinge where the quantum energy had left a peculiar bruise shaped exactly like the star system of Betelgeuse across her left side. She hadn't been there long when Floem and Bright found her. "You have survived another improbable injury," stated Bright, settling beside her on the bench with a faint suction cup sound. "The Academy's prediction algorithms cannot accurately model your continued existence." "Thanks," Joe replied, unsure if this was a compliment. Floem extended a tendril that delicately patted Joe's shoulder. "We are pleased by your persistent state of being alive. Many cadets place probability calculations on your survival after the quantum incident. I won computational currency by betting favorably. You bet on me living? Joe asked, genuinely touched. The odds were 17,436 to 1 against, Floem explained. It was a calculated risk based on your previous demonstrations of unlikely survival. Joe laughed, then winced as the motion aggravated her quantum bruise. Well, glad I could help you win. Whatever currency Moss uses. Photosynthetic credits, supplied Floem helpfully. I can now purchase premium mineral supplements. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the facility's entrance. Commander Xyloploth entered, accompanied by what appeared to be a delegation of Academy officials, including several beings Joe recognized as members of the Galactic Alliance High Command. "Attention!" called the commander, his voice carrying across the facility. All activity ceased immediately as cadets snapped to attention. Joe started to rise, but a twinge of pain from her still-healing injuries made her hesitate. The commander's gaze locked onto her, and to Joe's surprise, he made a small gesture indicating she should remain seated. The delegation moved purposefully in her direction. Cadet Walker. The commander began formally once they reached her. Allow me to introduce Admiral Zkazkar of the Galactic Alliance High Command and members of the Academy's Xenobiology Research Division. Joe attempted a seated salute, which probably looked ridiculous but was the best she could manage without grimacing in pain. An honor, Admiral. Admiral Zkazkar was a magnificent being with a body composed of what appeared to be liquid metal contained within a transparent exoskeleton. When they spoke, ripples of silver and gold cascaded through their form. Cadet Walker. The Admiral's voice was surprisingly melodious. Your recent exploits have come to the attention of High Command. We are most intrigued by your species' demonstrated resilience. Joe resisted the urge to say something flippant like we aim to please. Instead, she went with, "Thank you, Admiral. Humans have a long history of surviving things we probably shouldn't." Indeed, the Admiral's liquid form shimmered thoughtfully. The Academy's training programs were designed with certain biological assumptions. Your performance suggests these assumptions may require revision, particularly as more humans enter Alliance service. One of the xenobiologists, a being with green-tinted skin and enormous, pupilless eyes, stepped forward. We would like to propose a series of controlled studies to better understand human adaptability. Nothing dangerous, of course, merely careful documentation of recovery rates, stress responses, and cellular adaptation mechanisms. Joe looked from the xenobiologist to the Admiral to Commander Xyloploth, suddenly understanding what this was about. She wasn't just an oddity anymore. She was potentially changing how the entire Alliance understood human biology. "I'm happy to help," she said carefully, "as long as it doesn't involve me missing training. I'm here to become an officer, not a test subject." Admiral Zkazkar's form rippled in what might have been approval. "Well stated, Cadet. The studies would be conducted during your regular medical evaluations, with no interference to your training schedule. In fact," added Commander Xyloploth, "your continued participation in standard training is essential to the research. We need to document human responses to the full range of Alliance service conditions." Translation: they wanted to see what else she could survive. "All right," Joe agreed, "but I want something in return." The commander's antennae stiffened in surprise. "Cadet, you are addressing a High Admiral of the Galactic Alliance. This is not a negotiation." Admiral Zkazkar, however, seemed more amused than offended. "Let us hear the cadet's terms." Joe straightened as much as her injuries would allow. "The nutritional dispensers in the mess hall. The human-compatible one specifically. I want real food programming, not just nutritional paste. If I'm going to get quantum entangled in acid burn for science, I at least want to enjoy my meals." There was a moment of stunned silence, followed by an unexpected sound. Admiral Zkazkar was laughing, their liquid body vibrating with mirth and sending rainbow patterns cascading across their surface. "Remarkable," the Admiral said finally. "Faced with high officials and a chance to make a significant request, you ask for better food. This exemplifies why your species continues to surprise us, Cadet Walker." Joe shrugged, immediately regretting the motion as pain shot through her quantum bruise. Food matters. Morale matters. And honestly, that chocolate paste is an insult to cocoa beans everywhere. Your request is granted, declared the Admiral. I will personally authorize a complete reprogramming of the human-compatible dispensers to include what your species considers real food. And so began what the Academy would later call the Walker Protocol, a systematic documentation of human resilience under various training conditions, coupled with surprisingly good Earth-authentic meals. Over the following months, Jo continued to encounter training accidents, though none quite as dramatic as the quantum incident. She sustained burns, contusions, minor fractures, temporary sensory impairments, and on one memorable occasion, a complete reversal of her circadian rhythm that had her wide awake at night and struggling to stay conscious during daylight hours for 2 weeks. Through it all, she maintained what became her signature approach: acknowledge the injury, receive medical treatment, usually under Dr. Larillian's increasingly resigned supervision, and then, as she consistently phrased it, walk it off. This phrase became something of a mantra within the Academy. Other cadets began using it for any minor setback, medical or otherwise. Failed the navigation exam? Walk it off. Tentacle sprain during combat training? Walk it off. Accidentally evolved a new limb during metamorphosis phase? Walk it off. Dr. Larillian. After the 5th time, Jo appeared in the medical bay with another improbable injury from which she was already rapidly recovering, added a permanent note to the human medical protocols. Avoid excessive concern regarding non-critical injuries. Standard human recovery pattern involves verbal minimization of trauma, followed by resumed activity at earliest opportunity. This is not bravado, but appears to be an actual physiological recovery mechanism. Treatment recommendation: address immediate medical needs, then allow the human to walk it off as requested. The most significant test of Jo's resilience, however, came during the final survival training exercise of the year. Held in the Academy's most advanced simulation chamber, it recreated the conditions of a Class X unstable star system: fluctuating gravity, extreme temperature variations, and unpredictable reality distortions caused by the simulated star's radiation. Cadets will work in assigned teams to navigate from the deployment zone to the extraction point, Commander Zalaploth explained during the briefing. You will encounter multiple environmental hazards. The exercise tests not only individual resilience, but team cohesion under extreme conditions. Jo was assigned to a 4-person team including Phloem, Bright, and a crystalline entity named Facet. They had worked together previously and had developed an effective dynamic despite their wildly different physiologies and abilities. The simulation began smoothly enough. The team navigated through a jagged landscape of crystalline formations under orange-tinged skies, making good progress toward their objective. Jo took point, using her relatively good sensory perception to identify hazards, while Bright's 5-limb dexterity proved useful for handling equipment. Phloem's ability to alter its cellular structure allowed it to squeeze through narrow passages or extend tendrils to retrieve distant objects, and Facet's crystalline body proved resistant to the simulation's radiation effects. Gravitational shift incoming, warned Facet, whose structure could detect subtle changes in physical forces. Approximately 20 seconds until impact. The team secured themselves to a rock formation using magnetic anchors, preparing for the disorientation of shifting gravity. When it came, the change was more violent than anticipated. The gravity vector rotated 180 degrees and intensified, turning what had been down into a powerful up. Jo felt the magnetic anchor straining against her harness as her body was suddenly pulled toward what had moments ago been the sky. Around her, simulation debris began to fall upward, creating a deadly hail of crystalline shards and rock fragments. That's when the containment field surrounding a nearby simulation generator failed. In a real-world scenario, such a failure would have simply ended the exercise. But this was a test of emergency response as much as survival skills. A surge of uncontained simulation energy manifested as a visible distortion in the air, a crackling tear in the fabric of the simulated reality. "Breach!" shouted Facet, their crystalline body vibrating with alarm. Reality distortion, field collapsing. Commander Xyloplotha's voice came over the emergency channel. Simulation failure detected. Extraction protocols engaged. All cadets remain in position and await emergency transport. The team huddled together on their rocky outcropping, watching as patches of the simulated environment began to waver and dissolve. Emergency lights pulsed along the chamber's actual walls, visible now through the failing simulation. That's when Joe noticed something alarming. A group of crystalline cadets, junior year students observing the exercise from what should have been a safe distance, were trapped in a rapidly destabilizing section of the simulation. As the reality distortion field collapsed around them, it created a localized gravity well that was pulling them toward the breach. "Commander," Joe called over the comm. "Section 7B. Observers trapped in gravity distortion." "Evacuation drones dispatched," replied the commander. "All exercise participants hold position." But Joe could see the evacuation drones wouldn't reach the trapped cadets in time. The breach was expanding too quickly, the gravity well intensifying with each second. One crystalline cadet had already begun to crack under the pressure, fracture lines spreading across their translucent surface. Joe made a split-second decision that would later be described in Academy reports as either heroically selfless or catastrophically foolish, possibly both. She released her magnetic anchor. "Walker, what are you?" Bright's alarmed voice cut off as Joe launched herself toward the trapped cadets, using the reversed gravity to gain momentum. The sensation was like diving upward into a storm. Simulation debris pelted her as she moved, leaving cuts and bruises across every exposed bit of skin. The bizarre physics of the collapsing simulation meant that the air itself felt thick, resistant, as if she were swimming through invisible molasses. She reached the trapped cadets just as the first began to fracture seriously, long cracks spreading from the base to the apex of their crystalline form. "Hold on to each other," Joe shouted, unsure if they could even hear her through the distortion field's interference. But they understood, forming a linked chain with their angular limbs. Joe seized the nearest cadet and began moving laterally, trying to exit the gravity well's influence. The strain was incredible. It felt like trying to swim up a waterfall while carrying a boulder. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest, and she felt something tear in her left shoulder. The breach pulsed, releasing a wave of energy that struck Joe directly. Pain lanced through her torso, and for a sickening moment, she felt as if her internal organs were being rearranged. Blood filled her mouth, and her vision narrowed to a pinpoint of light surrounded by darkness. But she didn't let go. Couldn't let go. These weren't just fellow cadets. They were living beings who would die if she failed. So Joe did what humans have been doing since they first walked upright. She endured. With one final, desperate heave, she pushed the chain of crystalline cadets beyond the gravity well's edge, where emergency drones waited to retrieve them. As they cleared the danger zone, Joe felt a surge of relief, followed immediately by the realization that she had no momentum left to escape herself. The breach pulsed again, more powerfully. This time, the energy surge hit her squarely in the chest. Joe felt something vital rupture inside her. Lung? Maybe or something worse. The pain was transcendent, beyond her ability to process. For the first time since joining the academy, Josephine Walker thought, "This might actually kill me." Her last conscious act was to thrust her emergency beacon toward the nearest drone, hoping the signal would penetrate the distortion field. Then darkness claimed her. Yo woke to the now familiar ceiling of the medical bay, the steady beep of monitoring equipment, and a sensation of being simultaneously numb and in extraordinary pain. "She's conscious," came Dr. Larillian's voice from somewhere to her left. "Remarkable." Again, Joe tried to speak, but found her throat dry and uncooperative. A straw was placed against her lips, and she sipped cool water gratefully. The crystalline cadets? She managed a rasp once her throat was moistened. All intact and functional, replied the doctor. Thanks to your intervention, they suffered only minor fracturing, fully reparable. You, on the other hand. Jo braced herself for the damage report. Punctured lung, ruptured spleen, hepatic laceration, 3 broken ribs again, torn rotator cuff, first and second degree burns across 30% of your body, microfractures in your femur, and localized temporal displacement affecting approximately 15% of your cellular structure. Temporal displacement, Jo repeated weakly. Some of your cells are experiencing time at a slightly different rate than the rest of you, explained the doctor with clinical detachment. Nothing serious. The effects should resolve within a few weeks. You might feel occasional moments where parts of you seem to move before you've consciously decided to move them. Huh, Jo said, because what else could you say to that? So, when can I get back to training? Dr. Larillian made that untranslatable clicking sound that Jo had come to recognize as the Centaurian equivalent of a laugh-sigh hybrid. You humans truly are a biological wonder, the doctor said, adjusting something on Jo's treatment regimen. Most species with your level of physical vulnerability would have evolved either extraordinary regenerative capabilities or simply become extinct. Instead, you develop this inexplicable resilience. We call it stubbornness, Jo said with a weak smile. It's our superpower. Indeed, the doctor's multiple eyes blinked in sequence. Well, your stubbornness has earned you a commendation from High Command. Admiral ZK's car was most impressed by your actions. Jo would have shrugged if her shoulder wasn't immobilized. Just did what needed doing. And therein lies the mystery of your species, mused Dr. Larillian. You consistently do what needs doing, regardless of your physical limitations or the apparent impossibility of success. Before Jo could respond, the medical bay doors slid open to admit Commander Xyloploth, along with Floem, Bright, and Facet. Cadet Walker, the commander began formally. Your actions during the simulation failure demonstrated exceptional courage and commitment to your fellow cadets. Just following the first rule of academy training, sir, Jo replied. No cadet left behind. Indeed, the commander's antennae twitched with what Jo had learned to recognize as amusement, though perhaps with somewhat more dramatic interpretation than regulation suggests. Jo's teammates gathered around her bed, each expressing concern and admiration in their species-appropriate ways. Floem extended a gentle tendril to pat her hand, leaving behind a small, pleasant-smelling spore cluster that the moss explained was for accelerated healing. Bright simply rotated all 5 eyes in a complex pattern that Jo knew signified deep respect. Facet vibrated at a frequency that produced a softly melodious hum, a crystalline entity's way of expressing gratitude. The injured cadets wish to come thank you personally, explained the commander, but Dr. Larillian has restricted visitation to prevent overwhelming your recovery environment. They can thank me when I'm up and about, Jo said, then immediately had to suppress a cough that sent spikes of pain through her chest. Dr. Larillian noticed and adjusted something on Jo's treatment apparatus, which will be considerably longer than your previous recoveries. I must insist. Even human resilience has its limits. Jo wanted to argue, but found her eyelids suddenly heavy, a warm drowsiness spreading through her limbs. Did you just drug me? She asked accusingly. Merely adjusted your pain management, replied the doctor innocently. Rest is an essential component of recovery, even for humans. As Jo drifted towards sleep, she heard Commander Xyloploth speaking quietly to Dr. Larillian. The cadets she saved have requested permission to learn a human custom, the commander said. Something called a get-well-soon card. Is this medically advisable? At this point, replied the doctor with audible resignation, I believe human customs may indeed be the most effective treatment protocol we have. Jo smiled as consciousness faded. Perhaps she hadn't graduated yet, but she'd accomplished something more important. She'd helped the Academy understand the humans, for all their squishiness and apparent biological disadvantages, belonged among the stars. Recovery took longer than Jo. would have liked, but less time than Dr. Larillian had predicted. Within 2 weeks, she was mobile again, albeit with restrictions against unnecessary gravitational stress, temporal flux exposure, or heroic rescues of any kind. Her forced convalescence gave her plenty of time to catch up on theoretical coursework, and to her surprise, she found herself becoming something of a tutor to younger cadets who sought her out for advice. "Is it true," asked a wide-eyed avian first year, "that humans can survive having their heart stop for several minutes?" "Up to about 4 minutes without brain damage, in ideal conditions," Joe confirmed, enjoying the look of awe this produced. "Longer with immediate medical intervention and cold temperatures." "But how?" The cadet's feathers ruffled in disbelief. "Your species has no redundant organs." Joe considered how to explain. "We're not specialized, like many galactic species. We don't have natural armor or backup systems. Instead, we're generalists, adaptable, resilient. We bend instead of breaking. And when we do break, we're really good at patching ourselves back together." This explanation became something of a standard lecture as Joe found herself increasingly positioned as the unofficial human expert at the Academy. What began as casual questions evolved into informal study sessions in the recreation area, where Joe would explain human biology, psychology, and culture to genuinely curious cadets from across the galaxy. Dr. Larillian, upon discovering these impromptu lectures, surprised Joe by not shutting them down, but instead occasionally attending, sometimes offering medical clarifications or asking questions of their own. "You have become something of an ambassador for your species," the doctor observed one evening as the latest group of curious cadets dispersed. "Your approach to recovery has inspired a new physiotherapy protocol we're testing with multiple species." "Really?" Joe asked, intrigued. "What's it called?" "The official designation is Graduated Resilience through Incremental Challenge Therapy," replied the doctor. "But most of the medical staff simply refer to it as walking it off." Joe laughed, wincing only slightly as her still healing ribs protested. "That's actually kind of amazing." Indeed, Dr. Larillian's multiple eyes blinked in a pattern Joe had come to recognize as thoughtful. "Your species continues to influence Alliance practices in unexpected ways. The Academy's training protocols are being revised to incorporate lessons from your experiences." By the time Joe was cleared to return to full training, graduation was approaching rapidly. The final semester brought intense preparation for service assignments, leadership assessments, and specialized training in each cadet's chosen field. Joe had selected xenocultural relations, partly because of her newfound role as a human representative, but mostly because she genuinely enjoyed learning about the incredible diversity of galactic societies. The graduation ceremony was held in the Academy's Grand Assembly Hall, a vast chamber with a transparent dome that offered an unobstructed view of the surrounding star field. Cadets stood in formation, organized by specialization rather than species, creating a stunning visual mosaic of life forms from across the galaxy. Admiral Z.K. Skar delivered the commencement address, their liquid metal form shimmering majestically under the starlight streaming through the dome. As you prepare to take your places within the Galactic Alliance, the Admiral's melodious voice resonated through the hall. "Remember that our strength lies not in uniformity, but in diversity. Each species brings unique perspectives and abilities that, together, create something greater than the sum of its parts." Their liquid form rippled as their gaze seemed to find Joe in the formation. Some of you have learned this lesson more dramatically than others. The unexpected resilience demonstrated by certain cadets has reminded us all that appearances can be deceiving, and that determination can sometimes overcome even the most daunting physical limitations. After the general address came the individual recognition of outstanding achievements. Joe was startled to hear her name called. Cadet Josephine Walker, announced Commander Xyloploth, recipient of the newly established Resilience Citation for actions above and beyond biological probability. A ripple of what might have been laughter ran through the assembly as Joe stepped forward to receive the citation. A crystalline plaque that, when tilted to the light, revealed a holographic image of a human silhouette walking away from what appeared to be a massive explosion. "Thank you, Commander," Joe said formally, accepting the award. "Though I feel I should note that most of my actions above and beyond biological probability were actually just accidents." "In my experience, Cadet Walker," replied the commander, his antennae twitching with amusement. "How one responds to accidents often reveals more about character than carefully planned actions." The remainder of the ceremony passed in a blur of formal pronouncements, species-specific recognition rituals, and the final transition from cadets to officers. As the newly commissioned officers filed out of the assembly hall, Jo found herself approached by Dr. Larillian. "Officer Walker." The doctor greeted her formally, all 6 hands making the Alliance salute in perfect synchronization. "Congratulations on your graduation and assignment." "Thank you, Doctor," Jo replied, returning the salute. "I couldn't have done it without your patching me up so many times." "Indeed." The doctor's multiple eyes blinked in sequence. "I have compiled your complete medical history at the Academy into a research paper titled Resilience Beyond Reason: Human Adaptability in Extreme Conditions. With your permission, it will be published in the Galactic Medical Journal. Yokrinet. As long as you send me a copy. My mom will want to put it on the refrigerator back home." "I do not understand the connection between medical research and food preservation devices," confessed the doctor, "but I will comply with your request." Before Jo could explain the human custom of proudly displaying achievements in their living spaces, she was surrounded by her former teammates, all now fellow officers. "Officer Walker." Floem's voice emanated from what was now a much larger, more elaborately structured moss colony. "We have received our first assignment together." "Really?" Jo looked between Floem, Bright, and Facet with delight. "All of us." Bright extended a data tablet with one limb while the others gestured excitedly. "We are assigned to the research vessel Endless Discovery as a cultural contact team. Our first mission is to a newly discovered sentient species in the Cygnus Arm." Jo took the tablet, scanning the assignment details with growing excitement. The Endless Discovery was one of the Alliance's premier exploration vessels, designed for long-range missions to establish contact with new civilizations. Their team would be responsible for initial cultural assessments and diplomatic protocols. "This is perfect," she said, looking up at her teammates with a broad smile. "Exactly what we trained for." Commander Xyloploth approached their excited group, his exoskeleton polished to a ceremonial shine. "Officers, I see you've received your assignment." They snapped to attention, offering crisp salutes, which the commander returned. "The Endless Discovery requested your team specifically," he informed them. "Your performance during training demonstrated exceptional adaptability and cooperation across vastly different physiologies and perspectives, qualities essential for first contact missions." Jo couldn't help but ask, "Sir, did our assignment have anything to do with my incidents?" The commander's antennae twitched in what Jo now recognized as his equivalent of a smile. "Officer Walker, the universe is full of the unexpected. The Endless Discovery wanted a team that could handle whatever the cosmos might throw at them, including circumstances where traditional protocols fail and one must, as you would say, walk it off." The phrase, coming from the commander's formal speech patterns, struck Jo as so incongruously perfect that she had to suppress a laugh. "Thank you, sir," she managed, maintaining her professional demeanor. "We won't let you down." "I have no doubt," replied the commander. "The Academy will be following your career with great interest, Officer Walker. You have changed our understanding of what is possible." As the commander moved on to speak with other graduates, Jo turned back to her teammates, a familiar gleam of adventure in her eyes. "So," she said, "who's ready to meet some aliens?" "We are aliens," Bright pointed out logically, all 5 eyes blinking in sequence. "Details," Jo dismissed with a wave of her hand. "The important thing is we're going to be the first. And if anything goes wrong, we will walk it off," completed her teammates in perfect unison, having learned the human phrase that had become their unofficial motto. Yokrinet. She had arrived at the Academy as an oddity, a squishy, fragile human among beings with exoskeletons, regenerative abilities, and distributed consciousness. She was leaving as an officer, a teammate, and, perhaps most surprisingly, a symbol of resilience. As they filed out beneath the star-filled dome, Joe glanced back at the academy one last time. Whatever the universe had in store, temporal anomalies, quantum entanglements, or just garden-variety catastrophes, she was ready to face it. After all, if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was getting back up when they should, by all logical rights, remain down. The official Academy records would later include a new section in the xenobiology curriculum titled Human Physiological Responses, Expectations versus Reality, featuring case studies drawn largely from Officer Josephine Walker's cadet experiences. And in the medical bay, where Dr. Larillian continued to treat cadets of all species, a small plaque hung beside the treatment protocols, bearing a simple phrase that had become something of a medical mantra. When in doubt, walk it off.